Hello and welcome back to the second part of our Bible study in the letter to the Hebrews. Today we'll be looking at chapters 2, 3 and 4, having set the scene last time in the first chapter of the letter to the Hebrews, which if you haven't seen it yet, you might want to go back and find first. We saw there how the letter is set up to reflect the fact that Jesus brings something new, something different, in particular to the ways which God has revealed himself before through the prophets, through the angels, and through the work of those who have come to serve his people. And we set up some important themes, not least the fact that this is all about our salvation, our unity, our coming into the perfection of the kingdom of heaven, which God has prepared for us, and which in Jesus Christ has come so much closer than it ever has before. This salvation is a perfection, and that's why in this opening to chapter 2, the author of the letter to the Hebrews says that we cannot therefore neglect it or ignore it. He's saying we can't ignore what has been revealed through the Old Testament, through the Hebrew Scriptures, through what we already know about God, as so often throughout the New Testament. We're not saying that we need to disregard the Old Testament. We're saying that that is still valid. We're still saying that's important. And at this point into the letter to the Hebrews, we're saying that actually the commandments to avoid transgression or disobedience can't be ignored either. But actually, there is a different way of relating to God's witness, testimony, because God has added that, not least by the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which are distributed according to his will. So remember we said that the word for the tablets which Moses brought down from the mountain were a testimony. They weren't a covenant, and they weren't a commandment. They were a testimony. And for us as a church, I think that's important because of the way in which Paul, or the author of the letter to the Hebrews, uses the word testimony here in the letter. God has added his testimony by signs and wonders and various miracles and by gifts of the Holy Spirit, which are worked through Jesus Christ, and we have seen continue to be worked through the apostles. The Acts of the Apostles is clear on that the apostles can still work signs and wonders and miracles by the gifts of the Holy Spirit. That means that actually the testimony, which were what we call the laws or the Ten Commandments, or all those books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, which contain so many laws and customs and instructions, actually God can build up that testimony, not change it, but add to it and make it a continued process of discernment that means that we can still respond to this invitation of the Holy Spirit to, as it says in the ordinal, continue to stir up those gifts within us, both individually and as a church. And for a church today, I think that is so important because we're wrestling with ideas of what we might call change, but actually are of discernment and of constantly working to achieve the restful knowledge of what God wills for us. I'm slightly preempting what it's going to say later on. What I mean by that is the church is constantly having to answer to new challenges. What do we make of artificial intelligence? What do we make of online presence? What do we make of digital engagement with worship? What do we make of questions about scientific advancements, gene therapy? What do we make of decisions about life and death? What do we make of the skills that we have as medical practitioners in a modern age, which and all these issues are combining? And the church must respond. And I think the church is doing a good job of responding to that, because we are working hard to ensure that we are discerning the right way forward. And we can do that because God continues to add his testimony by signs and wonders and miracles and the gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will, not ours. And that has to be the constant struggle of the church. And that means there will always be people with different opinions, because if we all had the same opinion, then it would be our will, not God's. So it's constantly balancing, it's constantly checking, it's constantly struggling, it's constantly working. But that's a good thing, because what we are doing here is attaining holiness. And in the book of Exodus, that meant leaving the testimony, the witnessing, the instructing to others who had particular revelation to God. But in Jesus Christ, it means accepting that work of testifying for ourselves, for each and every one of us. No matter who you are, you have been given those gifts of the Holy Spirit. It's not just the work of the House of Bishops. It's not just the work of the Archbishop of Canterbury. It's not just the work of the rector or the vicar or the curate. It's not just the work of the church warden. It's the church of each and every member of Christ's body to testify, to continue to work to uncover his will. Why? Because the letter goes on to say 2:5, God did not subject this coming world, this world in which Jesus has arrived, Adventus. We'll get to that liturgically in December. Jesus has arrived. God didn't subject that world to the angels, to a different form of testifying, but actually has made us, human beings, only for a little while lower than the angels, yet crowning us with glory and honour, such that we can testify. Because that testimony, when it is done truly, brings us that glory. That is what people see. That means they believe and understand and receive our testimony. We saw that in John's Gospel too. Why? Because we see Jesus. That's 2:9. We see Jesus, and we see Jesus' glory, perfect glory, and therefore we receive Jesus' testimony. But Jesus' testimony gives us the power to testify too. But it's a testimony which means suffering of death, such that we can also see the resurrection to new life. So glory doesn't always mean there is no pain or suffering. And that's a challenge for us when we relate to the world as well. Glory and honour sometimes means recognizing the pioneering work which we need to do in order to overcome pain and suffering. That is why God is the one who, 2:11, is the one who sanctifies. That's the work of the Father, the work that we have to receive as his children. And that work was done by Jesus Christ as well. The work, 2:17, was to make a sacrifice of atonement for the sins of the people. so that we can overcome that pain and suffering once and for all. That is how we know that Jesus will help us, because he has put that work in too. A work which was perfected when he said, as we saw Moses prefigure in the book of Exodus, that he has finished his work. It is finished, one of his last words on the cross in John's Gospel. For Jesus, the work is finished, and yet his work is to invite us to continue to work to reveal that in our own lives too. Therefore, 3:1, brothers and sisters, we are holy partners in a heavenly calling. If you want to find a definition for the church, which doesn't involve words which might carry other baggage like saints or disciples or witnesses or martyrs, which all have their place and all have their use in the church. Consider that as a wonderful way to describe the people who worship in the pews and who are studying online with you. They are holy partners in a heavenly calling. Holy, because we are aware of the fullness of the presence of God. Partners, because actually we have a real effect on the outworking of salvation. In a calling, because we are known and called and named and invited and drawn on by God, who is in heaven. And that is our vision, the eschaton, the end times, the kingdom, the perfect life to which we are called, holy partners in a heavenly calling. And this is where the author of the letter to the Hebrews explicitly introduces Moses, to whom we were introduced in the book of Exodus. Just as Moses was faithful in all God's house, yet Jesus is worthy of more glory than Moses. Moses does work. Moses finishes his work, but Moses does not finish God's work. Jesus is both the pioneer and perfecter, finisher of our faith. So as great as Moses is, and as great as Moses was, and as great as Moses continues to be in Christian tradition, yet Jesus was something more. But that should give us hope, because we're not trying to be like Moses. We're not trying to finish our work. We're trying to be like Jesus. We're trying to enter into the finished work, which is God's. That should give us hope and confidence. That's 3:6. We hold firm the confidence and the pride that belong to hope. That word pride is interesting because sometimes we associate pride as a sin, and it is insofar as taking believing that the work we have done is our own work. That's pride. Is sinful. But actually there is a pride, there is a knowledge that it is God's work which we are entrusted to share in, and that we have a very real responsibility to take ownership for. That sort of pride does belong to hope and is a virtue, is a good thing. Therefore, the author says, if you hear his voice, again, the author is quoting the Psalms here, Psalm 95, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Do not say, I have no work to do. Do not say, well, if God has won our salvation, what do I need to do? That is hardening your heart. That is what Pharaoh did. That is what the people did when they asked Aaron for an idol. That is what time and time again the people do, say, this is nothing to do with us. It is everything to do with us. And it's hard work. So don't harden your heart, but enter into this invitation to do God's work with confidence, pride appropriately placed, and hope. Because, the author says, quoting the Psalms, if we do not do that work to present the salvation which God has won for us in our own lives, we will not enter God's rest. And I said before, when we encountered this passage in the book of Exodus, when we read that as the invitatory psalm at morning prayer, if you're doing it in a traditional format, every day, if you are doing it according to the modern common worship format, you'll read that psalm on Fridays in ordinary time, and you say as you wake in the morning, God swore in his anger, they shall not enter my rest. You are doing it because you are setting up the need to work hard over the coming day by the grace of God and at his invitation and by his gifts to attain that rest. And the rest of chapter 3 and chapter 4 of the letter to the Hebrews explores what that means. The letter to the Hebrews is absolutely clear that there is still a rest to enter. By saying you shall not enter my rest, God is not saying there is not a perfect rest to enter. And read the letter. That's what the author says. There must still be a rest because he promises it elsewhere. So what must we do? But we must work hard to enter that rest. 4:11, let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one may fall through such disobedience as Joshua's or Moses or Aaron's or the people of Egypt's. That is why we use that as the invitatory psalm at morning prayer. That is why we read it and know that there is a promise of rest that God has provided for us, which we must work to attain. And that's why earlier on I said that I was slightly preempting what the rest of the letter to the Hebrews says, when I said that actually doing that work means we know what is restful. And that might seem like the wrong way round, but that is absolutely how it works. We've touched on this already about how worship and liturgy and prayer and service should be restful, how fulfilling our identity and our relationships should be restful. If they're not restful, the opposite of rest is abuse, which is something we've struggled with in our discussions and which as a church we struggle with. The opposite of rest is abuse. And that is why we must work hard to safeguard against abuse. That is why safeguarding is about constantly training ourselves, constantly being alert to movements and activity within the community. That is why safeguarding is about constantly reviewing and studying and discussing what is good for us as a people, as a community, as a church. Safeguarding is hard work in a scriptural sense, because safeguarding means we can enter a restful way of being, not an abusive way of being. And that is hard work, because abuse can creep into all sorts of aspects of our life, of our relationships, of our worship, including where we're not expecting it. But we must work hard to ensure that our activities as a church are restful, because we know they are of God and not of anything or anyone else. Because God promises that he will provide that rest. And I hope you can see why and how that might work, having read these few chapters of the letter to the Hebrews. So then he finishes 4:14. Since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens. He's introduced that word priest, which we haven't had before, but we know from the book of Exodus, is talking about that moment, that person who joins together the presence and the disconnect from God. That moment of connection is made in Jesus the high priest, who has passed through the heavens. Let us hold fast to that confession, because Jesus can sympathize with the fact that holding fast is hard work. He recognizes our weakness, and yet he still encourages us to approach with boldness the throne of God, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Grace and mercy. So that when we find ourselves in a place of disconnect, of sinfulness, of submitting to temptation, of abuse, we don't leave that place shamefully, but confidently. That Jesus knows what work it takes for us as human beings to seek continually the rest which only he knows fully and which only he can promise. We'll leave the letter to the Hebrews there for now, but please do come back and join me for chapters 5, 6 and 7 next time.